Ethiopia's initiative to establish its own fertilizer plant through Aliko Dangote represents a significant move towards achieving self-sufficiency and sustainable development. In light of the country's reliance on imported fertilizers and the disruptions in global supply chains, this project aims to ensure a reliable supply of nutrients for farmers, enhance agricultural productivity and foster industrial growth. Furthermore, it supports broader regional objectives related to Africa's industrialization, food security and economic integration as outlined in Agenda 2063. In this special edition, we are pleased to welcome Dr. Costentinos, who has worked as a senior policy advisor on governance, poverty and sustainable development at the UN in New York and has served as chair of the African Union Anti-Corruption Advisory Board. Stay with us. Sir, welcome to our program. And, well, let me begin with asking you the effect of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which exposed vulnerabilities in Africa's reliance on imported fertilizers. And what do you think regarding the solutions that Ethiopia's project offer to mitigate these issues?
I think this is a very important topic. In a sense, almost 30 years ago, this was the primary priority of the government in terms of establishing a fertilizer plant in Ethiopia. Ethiopia being almost 85% an agricultural country, it's very important that fertilizer availability for our farmers is as easy as possible. But for different reasons, it didn't happen. The second reason is we depend very much on fertilizer imports. And the rationale for having a fertilizer plant in Ethiopia stems from many facts. One, we're importing fertilizer which are bulk, and the transport cost itself is probably as much as the cost of the fertilizer. The second thing is the Russia-Ukraine war has devastated supply chain lines across the world. And these two countries being the major exporters of wheat, wheat number one, and fertilizers number two, Ethiopia had challenge in this. And of course, our farmers are not happy with the fact that the fertilizers are delayed and for some odd reason not coming in time. So I say it's very timely, and this is a major initiative. More than building other infrastructures, fertilizer is an important component for food production. It's an important part of our food sovereignty because our farmers depend very much, especially in the highlands where land has been plowed for more than 3,000 years. As far as documents can show, it's very important that fertilizer supplements should be there as an input to the Ethiopian production system.
I see. Thank you, sir. Well, let me come to, of course, the necessity for reducing dependence on global fertilizer imports for the African continent, and especially in relation to international shocks and market fluctuations. Why do you think reducing dependence on global fertilizer imports for Africa is necessary?
Well, it's very important. Number one, Africa has the resources that are necessary to build its own agricultural powerhouse, industrial powerhouse. Africa has the largest farmland now next to Asia. Africa has freshwater resources that probably most continents don't have now, but we are not using them. If we take, for example, Ethiopia, our rivers export more than 120 billion cubic meters of water every year outside the country. But how much of that do we use it here? We have huge agricultural land. So African countries must depend themselves on the production of fertilizers, on the production of inputs, other agricultural inputs too, like pest control, whether they are biological or chemical. And this is how we can feed our own continent. Now, Africa has depended much on aid. The fact is seen very clearly now has been manifested by the close down of the United States Agency for International Development. African countries, non-governmental and civil society organizations are crying because this agency has been closed. So Africa is dependent on aid, and therefore with our young population, which is more than 70%, our water potential, our mineral potential, our agricultural potential, Africa not only can feed itself, but it can export so much food products out of this continent that it can stabilize world food prices. And at the same time, now with the emerging middle class in India, China, and Asia in general, food prices are becoming very expensive.
My second question goes to the importance of reducing dependence on global fertilizer imports, which is of course crucial for Africa's resilience against international shocks and market fluctuations. What do you say on this, sir?
Well, I think this is a very important question because Africa has a huge landmass, agricultural land. It has plenty of water resources. It has a very young population. And if we can combine this, Africa can not only feed itself, but also be an important source of export for other nations, especially now that countries like China, India, and some in Asia, the middle class is growing so fast that food commodities are becoming very expensive. And also we have challenging regions now, not only in Africa, but all over the world, which need food aid by the United Nations World Food Program. So definitely Africa has the potential to do this. And to do this, we need to have the capacity to be able to produce the food here. The technological capacity, and of course the human power to undertake this. So having a fertilizer plant is a key issue in this. Of course, some African countries like Morocco have vast potential in terms of producing fertilizers, and they in fact export. But other African countries still have to import this bulk. So Africa has to be self-reliant in this area, especially now we have the African Continental Free Trade Area where African countries can trade between themselves in terms of supporting each other, using their own currencies. Now we have to use the international currency like the US dollar and euro to be able to import this stuff. The second thing is the lesson from the Russia-Ukraine war is that supply chains can be disrupted anytime. The Houthis in Yemen are attacking the shipping lanes of the Red Sea. So supply chains collapse. So it's very important that African countries should have reliable source of fertilizer production in their own countries. As I said earlier, much of the world has grown from a farming economy into an industrial economy. The problem with Africa is especially countries that have been colonized, when they were liberated, they went into a service economy instead of building their industrial capacity. So industrial capacity development is the sine qua non. And of course, now we learn from the UAE and China, where industrial parks have been flourishing. And some African countries are also copying this very well. But definitely, this is the way forward. We have to be able to produce the most essential goods and services within this continent itself.
Yeah, sir. Well, it is well agreed that we need to have this kind of fertilizer plant, but how about just the need to increase the production in a way that is surplus?
Well, yes, there is no question about this. Once we start producing this work, it's easy to upscale this in terms of getting to scale where we can be exporting these products from different African countries. I tell you, this is not a difficult task for Africa because China is a great example. It became member of the World Trade Organization in 2001. Now it has become the factory of the world, literally. It's exporting everywhere, in every corner of the world. So Africa can have that potential. I think one of the challenges here is to look into our governance trajectories within this continent, so that not only is the technological and the financial side important in its realization, but it's also the management of this process, the political administration of such developments. And therefore, some countries have been successful and they are transitioning to developed economies, like Mauritius, for example. But in most of Africa, this public administration issue and development administration issue becomes a very concrete part of our upscaling the development of our industrial capacity.
Well, of course, Ethiopia's fertilizer plant plays its peculiar role in different aspects. And I just would like to ask you how it plays a role in supporting regional integration and cooperation within Africa, especially under the framework of Agenda 2063.
Well, definitely Ethiopia has been in the forefront of regional integration in a sense. In 1958, when the United Nations proposed to set up a United Nations Economic Commission for Africa, it was based in Addis Ababa. It's still here. After that, Ethiopia took the steps to unite the African continent by bringing the Monrovia and Casablanca group together to form the Organization of African Unity. Ethiopia was the foremost in international organizations. We were even a member of the League of Nations, a member of the non-aligned nations, and we are founding member of the United Nations too. So in terms of regional integration, Ethiopia has been key in the political and administrative front. And now, with increasing our production, food production, definitely the inter-African trade will be promoted, regional integration will be promoted. Especially in the Eastern African bloc, Africa is divided into 5 blocks. You have what you call the regional economic communities. Yes. And when it comes to the East African region, we have IGAD, the ESC, and of course COMESA. All this will benefit from this inter-African trade. And Ethiopia is connected on road transport to most of these countries. And we have Ethiopian Airlines, which connects the entire continent of Africa, where commodities can be transported very, very easily on cargo shipping. So I think now is the time where we work towards this goal in terms of getting African countries to unite more and get the inter-African trade to be promoted. I know there are a lot of obstacles. Infrastructure is one. Policies of countries is the other. The availability of communication means between different countries is also an impediment. Former colonial powers are also playing a very key role. What we see in West Africa is you have a series of military coups going on, which are predicated on the grounds that they are still neo-colonized by former colonial powers. So the African Union must pursue a more aggressive strategy in terms of getting the inter-African trade to bloom. Ethiopia then must project itself into this by creating its own industrial capacity and developing its industrial capacity. This fertilizer plant alone that has been planned and signed in the Somali region of Ethiopia is not the only resource we have. We have also lots of potash in the Afar region. Yes. And therefore the Danakil has big potential. So we can really be a fertilizer exporting country to the rest of African countries. And in some cases, it's not just inter-African trade, but we need to have inter-African cooperation where we can support other less endowed nations to have this kind of facilities in their own countries.
Yeah, when we talk about integration in the African continent, of course, we have, an institution, a kind of tool for the integration of the African countries in general, which is the African Continental Free Trade Area, and I think it plays a big role in supporting the integration of nations in various ways in the African continent. So what can you tell us about the role the African Continental Free Trade Area can play in this regard?
Well, it will. The African Trade Agreement has been going on for a long, long period of time, for decades. The Lagos Plan of Action that came back into the 70s and 80s was a foundation of the African unity. And African trade was the main agenda here. Before you can have political unity, you have to have this kind of trade relations and economic integration in general. So now we have the Inter-African Trade Office based in Accra, which is promoting inter-African trade, especially tariff-free trade. For one, this is very important because now our factories that have been producing for the African Growth and Opportunity Act by the United States Congress to go duty-free to the United States, this is about 7,000 items, now can be exported tariff-free to African countries, within African countries. And therefore, African trade becomes very important here. The second thing is Africa can produce different commodities in different places, depending on the agroecological zones, depending on the endowment of the mineral capacity of each country. If we take, for example, the Democratic Republic of Congo, it's estimated that it has more than $30 trillion worth of minerals. It's, on paper, it's the richest country in the world, richer than China and the United States. But it's the poorest country in actual fact. So developing the mineral capacity in DRC, developing the Inga Dam alone could provide Africa with 54,000 megawatts, which could cover literally half of Africa. So this integration is very important. Some of the question is, we have the integration on paper, we have the office set up in Accra, but do African countries have the real commitment to push on this? How much time is it going to take before we integrate and become a united Africa by 2063? So these are questions that have been lingering in the minds of a lot of people. But I think major countries in Africa should push for this: South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Nigeria. These are countries with huge populations and, of course, where they have high economic growth rates, and they can really put pressure on other African countries to promote this inter-African trade, inter-African movement of labor, which is going to be fundamental in the production of goods and services.
Yeah, good. Ethiopia's efforts, of course, to align its goals with Agenda 2063 is very important, especially in relation to promoting industrialization, value addition, and self-reliance. And this is a very good thing. And Ethiopia, of course, has begun this journey by establishing, this plant. And in connection to meeting the goals of Agenda 2063, nations, the African nations in general, including Ethiopia, what sort of efforts do you think they should put into it?
As I said earlier, Ethiopia has been taking the leadership in terms of African unity. Emperor Haile Selassie, and he had very capable ministers at that time who were the engines that brought African unity to fruition. I think Ethiopia should continue on that path. Our efforts should focus on getting African nations to make a meaningful stride towards this goal. The challenge we have with the African Union is the African Union, if you see the United Nations Charter, it says, we the people of the United Nations. The African Union Charter says, we the heads of state and government of Africa. So we have to transform that into we the peoples of Africa. And Ethiopia can work towards that goal. The second thing is, we have different kinds of political systems in Africa. We have parachuted democracies that other countries are trying to impose on countries. And we have seen also elected officials now being replaced by a military junta. So the important thing is that Ethiopia can set the example for African unity. Ethiopia can push for African unity. And I think we have to have a much bigger organization within the Ethiopian government that promotes inter-African integration, not just in terms of trade, but the people-to-people connection, public diplomacy, especially civil society organizations have become very important in Africa now. We should have a kind of a summit for civil society organizations within Addis Ababa here, so that it's not just the head of states that come to a meeting, but you have civil society organizations, which of course compose like labor unions, musicians, artists, academia. All these are important players in African politics. And if we're going to improve Africa, I think we need to bring that base. Especially now Africa, you saw the recent meeting here in Addis Ababa on illicit financial flows. Africa is really losing trillions of dollars because of corruption and illicit financial flows. When you bring civil society, you can control this, because states by themselves couldn't control this. And as I said, countries like DRC, mineral-rich countries that we have in this continent, agriculturally rich countries that we have in this continent, can produce a lot. And if Ethiopia can play a key role in getting African countries to be able to join forces in bringing the vision of a united Africa, not just united in terms of political unity, not just in terms of voting at the United Nations General Assembly, but in terms of getting their own civil society to be happy here. We see today a lot of our young people go through the Mediterranean Sea, through the Red Sea, to have a better life in Europe. But they can have the better life here in Africa. And I think we need to put that vision up front. It's not just speech, but we have to have a program, a plan of action and a roadmap that's going to help us to bring civil society into action in Africa.
Dr. Costentinos Berhetesvat, thank you very much for devoting your time to talk to us.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Viewers, thank you very much. Today's special edition ends right here. Next time we'll come up with others. Until then, goodbye.